Right now, somewhere in your house, a floorboard creaks. Your heart jumps before your brain even catches up. You freeze. You listen. Nothing happens. You laugh it off and go back to your phone. But for most of human history, that jolt of fear wasn't a false alarm. It was the difference between seeing tomorrow and not seeing it. You think you know fear. Spiders, heights, public speaking, small, modern, manageable things. But the real answer is far stranger. Your ancestors weren't afraid of things. They were afraid of the dark itself, of silence that shouldn't be silent, of eyes they couldn't see watching them from the tree line. Their fear wasn't a personality quirk. It was a survival system, sharpened over hundreds of thousands of years. And you're still carrying it around in your skull today. Start with the dark. For 99% of human history, there was no light switch. When the sun went down, the world didn't just get dimmer. It became a different place entirely. Vision, your most trusted sense, the one you rely on for almost everything, simply stopped working. And that's when the real predators came out. Lions hunt at night. So do leopards. So do hyenas. Your ancestors on the African savanna were not the strongest animal in the room. They were not the fastest. They didn't have claws or fangs or thick hides. What they had was a group, a fire, and fear. Fear told them to stay close to the flames. Fear told them not to wander. The individuals who felt nothing when the darkness pressed in, the ones who wandered off alone at night out of curiosity or boredom, simply didn't live long enough to pass that calmness on. You are descended from the nervous ones, the jumpy ones, the ones who couldn't relax until they'd checked the shadows twice. Anthropologists Donna Hart and Robert Sussman spent years studying the fossil record of early hominins and found something the popular imagination had mostly ignored. Early humans weren't just hunters, they were hunted. Bite marks on ancient skulls, the kind that matched the jaw spacing of extinct big cats, tell a quiet and brutal story. Your ancestors lived much of their lives as prey, not occasionally, constantly. And prey animals that survive share one trait above all others. They are afraid of the right things, at the right times, without needing to be taught. Think about what that actually means for a moment. It means the version of ancient human you might picture, spear in hand, confidently facing down a lion, is mostly fiction. For long stretches of early human history, the safest strategy wasn't confrontation. It was avoidance. It was silence. It was making yourself small, quiet, and forgettable to something bigger and hungrier. Fear wasn't the failure to be brave. Fear was the entire plan. And the body reflects that plan even now. Why do you flinch at sudden movement in your peripheral vision before you consciously register what it is? Why does a low growl, even from a small dog, send a jolt through your chest that a bark alone doesn't? Deep, low-frequency sounds mimic the vocalizations of large predators. Your nervous system doesn't wait for confirmation. It reacts first and asks questions later. Because for most of your ancestors, waiting for confirmation was the last mistake they ever made. Campfires make sense in this light, and not just as a source of warmth. Fire pushed back the darkness in a radius your ancestors could actually see and defend. Groups that maintained fire through the night lost fewer members to nocturnal predators than groups that let it die out. Over enough generations, this created a kind of quiet selection pressure. Tend the fire, fear the dark, stay inside the circle of light. Those three unwritten rules, obeyed instinctively rather than intellectually, shaped how your ancestors organized their entire nights for hundreds of thousands of years. That's the part that should stop you for a second. Without needing to be taught, have you ever wondered why small children, who have never once been attacked by a snake, still recoil from anything long and slithering on the ground? Why toddlers, who have never seen a spider bite anyone, still pull their hand back the moment one crawls near? Neuroscientist Lynn Isbell proposed an idea that reframed an entire branch of evolutionary biology. She argued that the primate brain, including yours, evolved much of its visual sharpness specifically to detect snakes, not to admire sunsets, not to recognize faces, although that came later, to spot a coiled shape in the leaf litter half a second faster than the primate next to you. Half a second. That's not a big number, but over millions of years, across millions of individuals, that half a second is the difference between a bloodline that continues and one that ends in a single afternoon. So when your stomach drops at the sight of something snake-shaped in your garden hose, that's not irrational. That's an inheritance. A tool passed down from a creature you never met, who never met you, but who somehow left you a warning anyway. Researchers testing this idea have run experiments showing infants as young as a few months old, long before they could have learned anything from culture or television, already show heightened attention and stress responses to images of snakes compared to other harmless shapes of similar size and color. That's not a learned fear. Learned fears take time, exposure, repetition. This one arrives pre-installed. It's less like a lesson your parents taught you and more like a factory setting, built into the wiring before you ever opened your eyes. Consider how strange that actually is when you slow down and look at it directly. A snake has never bitten you. Maybe it never will. And yet somewhere in your brain, a system built by ancestors you will never know how to name is still standing guard, still scanning the grass, still ready to yank your hand back a half second before your conscious mind even understands why. Now, think about a different kind of fear, not predators, people. Here's a question. Why does being excluded from a group conversation sting so much? Why does a single unread message, a single joke you weren't invited to, sit in your chest for hours? It seems disproportionate. It shouldn't matter this much. But for your ancestors, it mattered more than almost anything else in the world. A human alone on the savannah, cut off from the group, had almost no chance. No group meant no shared warmth at night. No group meant no one to keep watch while you slept. No group meant no one to help you carry water, tend a wound, or fight off a hyena at the edge of camp. Exclusion wasn't an inconvenience. It was closer to a death sentence, just a slower one. Evolutionary psychologist Randolph Nesse has argued that many of the emotions you consider irrational, jealousy, social anxiety, the sharp sting of rejection, are not malfunctions of the mind at all. They are precise, calibrated warning systems, built by evolution to keep you inside the safety of the tribe. Your brain doesn't know that today, being left off a group chat won't actually get you eaten by a leopard. It just knows the old rule. Stay in the group. Whatever it costs you emotionally, stay in the group. That's why isolation still feels like danger. Even in a house with locked doors and a working furnace, your body hasn't gotten the memo that the world changed. As far as your nervous system is concerned, it's still out there on the open grassland. And being alone is still the worst thing that can happen to you. Anthropologist Robin Dunbar has spent much of his career studying how social bonds held early human groups together, long before written language or formal leadership existed. He found that grooming, gossip, and shared storytelling weren't just pleasant ways to pass the evening. They were the glue. They were how a group decided, silently and continuously, who belonged and who didn't. Falling out of favor with the group wasn't a minor social hiccup. It could mean losing access to food sharing, protection, and childcare all at once, all in a landscape with no safety net waiting outside the tribe. That helps explain something else about you. Why do you replay an awkward conversation for days afterward? Why does a joke that fell flat in a meeting still bother you at 2 a.m? Your ancestors who obsessed over small social missteps, who lay awake worrying whether they'd offended someone in the group, were the ones who worked hardest to repair those relationships the next morning. The ones who shrugged it off and moved on sometimes found themselves quietly, gradually, pushed toward the edges of the group. And the edges of the group were exactly where the predators were watching. There's a third fear, quieter than the other two, and in some ways stranger. The fear of the unknown itself. Picture your ancestors standing at the edge of familiar territory. Beyond that ridge, they had never gone. No one in the group had gone. What was out there? Maybe nothing. Maybe water and food and safety, or maybe something that would kill them before they even understood what it was. Neuroscientist Joseph Ledoux spent decades mapping how fear moves through the brain, and one of his most striking findings involves a structure called the amygdala. It reacts to threat before the rest of your brain has even finished processing what it's looking at. You don't think your way into fear. You feel it first, and the thinking comes later, sometimes seconds later. For your ancestors, that speed was everything. An animal that waited to fully understand a rustling bush before reacting was an animal that often didn't get a second chance to understand anything at all. The unknown, then, wasn't just uncomfortable to your ancestors. It was, by default, treated as dangerous until proven otherwise. Better to assume the worst and be wrong than assume the best and be dead. That single rule shaped how humans approached new landscapes, new foods, new strangers from other groups. Caution wasn't weakness. Caution was the whole strategy. Does that sound familiar? Think about how you feel walking into a new job on your first day, or moving to a city where you don't know anyone. Your palms sweat a little. Your voice comes out smaller than usual. You scan the room before you sit down. None of that danger is real, not in the way a leopard was real. But your body doesn't fully believe that. It runs the same old software it's always run, because that software worked for a very, very long time. Here's the part that might be the hardest to sit with. Fear was not your ancestors' weakness. It was their edge. Every other advantage humans have, cooperation, tool use, language, storytelling, was built on top of a foundation of finely tuned fear. Groups that felt no fear didn't survive to invent language. Individuals who wandered fearlessly into the dark didn't live long enough to pass on their genes. The calm, brave, fearless version of early humans you might imagine in your head never got the chance to become your ancestors. Your ancestors were the anxious ones, the watchful ones, the ones who lay awake a little longer, listening. So the next time your heart pounds over nothing, over a message left on read, over a strange sound in an empty house, over a hallway you've never walked down before, remember what that feeling actually is. It's not a flaw in your design. It's a message carried across hundreds of thousands of years from people who never gave a single moment of comfort priority over staying alive. Tonight, when you turn off the last light in your house, take a moment. Notice the small flicker of unease that runs through you in the dark, just for a second before you settle in. That flicker is not new. It is not modern anxiety or overthinking or a personality trait. It is one of the oldest things about you. Older than your name, older than your language, older than the walls around you. It's the last echo of every ancestor who ever survived a night in the dark so that you could be here to feel it too.